Hi, welcome to the special seminar, special talk by Jane Kim about her wall of birds. I'm very excited about being here, and I hope you all are too. I'm Kevin McGowan. I'm with the education section of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and I've been around here a long time, and I've seen some good things come through, and Jane's one of the best, so it's really a pleasure. So I met Jane back in 2010 when she came in as a Bartels, what we called interns then, now illustrators. And it was really fun to see what she did. I work with the illustrators fairly frequently. I can't draw a stick figure, but I know what birds look like, and I've developed the ability to be able to tell people what's wrong and to polish already good work. And so I've been working with the illustrators. I'm still working with the illustrators. It's always been a great privilege to be able to watch what they do. And so when Jane came here, I worked with her a little bit, and I was showing her a few things, and I'm pretty sure I slightly improved a couple of things in the beginning. But then I sort of turned to her and said, "Why are you here? Why aren't you out making big bucks?" And she said, no, I'm learning a lot. And I think she did, and I think she had a good time here. It was certainly great fun having her here. She was a very positive person, very fun to talk to and see what she was working on. I was struggling with some things I was creating a couple of online courses back then and was left to do some of the graphic design by myself, which was a horrible mistake. And so I remember putting things out to Jane and showing her a few things, and she was always so encouraging about stuff, just so encouraging. I had this one thing that I was struggled to get a concept across. And she's like, "Oh, that's so good, that looks so great." And I said, "Well, you can make it look better, right?" She said, "Oh, yeah. I can make it look better." And she could. And so when the announcement was made to create the wall of birds, I was thrilled that it was going to happen for a couple of reasons. One, that I was absolutely thrilled to the thought of having Jane back here to interact with again. And Fitz had always been, since the building had been built, John Fitzpatrick, our director, he always would look at the walls and sort of mutter to himself. And he's like, "Oh, don't you think we need to have something up on the walls?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we need something up on the walls." And you could just see him every now and then. He'd be coming up and down the stairs, and he'd just look at these blank walls and say, something needed to be done. And that's just such a wonderful way that it all came together. Every day that Jane was here working on the wall, she did a lot of stuff at night. And so I'd come in the morning, and you never knew what was going to be up there next. And it was always exciting to see what had been put up on the wall the night before. And it was also fun to take a break. You're sitting at your computer, and you're working hard, and it's like, I got to get up and do something. Maybe I'll go down and see what Jane's doing on the wall. And she'd see her up there on the lift painting away, and it was really a spectacular project to watch. And I wasn't involved that much in it, but enough to feel that it was really a special thing. I think one of the things, most amazing things about Jane's work is that she works at such scales, so from tiny, small, detailed things to these giant masterpieces. I mean, she paints on barns and buildings and things like that. And then if you look at the detail, if you just look at one of the largest birds on the wall out there is the cassowary, the life-size cassowary. And you look closely at that, and there are thousands and thousands of tiny little marks on there, the brush strokes, that are just incredible to see how it goes from that small to the big. And I'd like to thank Jane for one other minor thing. When she finished the wall, she and her husband Thayer hosted a karaoke going away party at the K House. And I have to say, karaoke was always a pathological fear of mine. And for Jane, I went and participated in karaoke for the first time ever, which was interesting. And I was certainly not surprised, a little angry perhaps, but that Jane is a spectacularly talented singer and karaoke one. It's like, so much talent all in this one little person. It's just those of us who don't have that kind of talent sort of get a little jealous every now and then. But it's really so special to see. She has such great artistic talent. Intelligence, wit, beauty, great singing voice, and such a joyful personality. She's just been a pleasure to be around. And I feel I am very fortunate to be able to work with you and to know you as a friend.
Thank you.
So would you please all join me in welcoming Jane Kim tonight?
Hi, can you all hear me? I'm just gonna adjust this here. Oh, thank you. It is so wonderful to be back here. It's been 4 years since the project was completed, and I haven't been back since, so I really can't think of a better reason to come back than to have had some space from the mural, quite frankly, some time to reflect and to share this book that Thayer Walker, my husband and business partner, and I wrote together, chronicling just some of the stories that I could remember from the project after having some time. I would really like to thank the lab once again. Inkwell, which is the name of my art studio, was only created maybe a year or two after I left being a Bartels intern. And this project here with the Wall of Birds was really sort of the beginning of that career. And so I am forever grateful to Dr. John Fitzpatrick, for believing in me. It was really remarkable what the opportunity that the lab really gave to me and my career, and helping me shape what kind of artist I want to be. So tonight's going to be a lot of reading from the book, and also sharing a little bit of history of my work. So without further ado, what I'd really love to share and open with is John's foreword. It is quite moving. I'm not going to be reading the entire excerpt, but just some moments of that. So, forward. The early 20th century was an artistic heyday for natural history museums, as they invented new ways to bring spectacular natural places, exotic species, and conservation ethics to their visitors. The hallmarks of that era were dioramas, three-dimensional masterpieces of taxidermy and background painting created by superb taxidermists and master artist naturalists. These craftsmen, and they were indeed all men, knew their subjects intimately, often traveling the world to document real places with field sketches before melding knowledge and passion into timeless replicas of biological diversity. The background painters included such legendary wildlife artists as Louis Agassiz Fuertes, Carl Rungis, and Francis Lee Jaques, while artists like Charles R. Knight and Rudolf Zallinger became equally legendary for painting monumental murals depicting prehistoric life. I just really connected with that very first paragraph, because indeed, when I left the Rhode Island School of Design, I moved immediately to San Francisco, and it took about 6 years before I decided to apply to the science illustration program at the California State University in Monterey Bay. I had always had a great affinity towards technical drawing and the natural world, but there were precise moments in that time between 2003 and 2009 that left lasting impressions. And this particular piece, does anyone recall where this is? This is at the La Brea Tar Pits at the Page Museum. And in the middle of their exhibit are these phenomenal cases, these glass cases of articulated bird skeletons. And that's, of course, interesting in and of itself, but behind that were these remarkable paintings by John Dawson. You might also recognize his work through the collection of postage stamps that he created, those Habitat postage stamps. But I was absolutely mesmerized and enamored by the work and the value that these paintings added to my understanding of these birds and the experience in the museum. So there was a real aha moment there where I thought to myself, this is what I want to do. So I really started to pay attention to moments like that and decided to pursue a career in scientific illustration. So now I really sort of work in tandem with visual art and the discipline of science illustration. And I had the great fortune of working with Fitz directly on a project when I was here as a Bartels intern, and this is one of the pieces that I worked on with him. It's funny, it didn't actually end up being used for anything, but man, was it great fun to make. And so I'm going to just continue reading a little bit more from his passages. The Cornell Lab has embraced the intimate relationship between art and ornithology throughout its 100-year history. The lab's founder, Arthur A. Allen, was a close friend of Louis Agassiz Fuertes and a mentor of the noted artist and ornithologist George Miche Sutton at Cornell. Allen pioneered the art of color photography and nature, and he launched the lab's first journal, The Living Bird, which featured paintings and sketches deftly intermingled amid its scientific articles. The new building provided space to begin hosting artists in residence, and soon our longtime friends Phil and Susan Bartels began funding the Bartels Science Illustration Program. Consequently, from 2007 to the present, the lab has hosted a Bartels illustrator on staff almost continuously, each one selected from a highly competitive pool of early career illustrators and graphic artists. Jane Kim came to the lab as a Bartels illustrator early in 2011, a talented young artist with a bachelor's degree from blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that part you got. So the aha moment came when word filtered around the lab that Jane had won a design contest for a series of outdoor murals, which she proposed to paint in Central California. You'll see those murals later in the slides. Murals, I thought. We have an in-house artist who is interested in murals. I rushed to find Jane, and after congratulating her, I asked her to accompany me out to our second floor walkway, where I pointed at the enormous empty olive drab wall. I don't know if you can tell in this picture, but you can see in the corner there, it was a completely different color. It was sort of this olive drab green color. There was nothing on it. Where was I? So on this olive drab wall, my dream of a grand mural depicting avian evolution had scarcely left my lips before Jane's eyes opened wide and she shouted, "I want to do it. Please, let me do it." I asked her to develop a design and the project was born. So this is really where I need to be so grateful that he believed in that. He had asked several other artists before me, and this is also in his forward, that had said, "Oh, nice idea, but it's just way too big of a project. I'm not going to take that on." So I was fresh enough and young enough and wide-eyed enough to tackle that really with everything that I had, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. So I'm just going to kind of backtrack a bit and give a little bit more information about the work that we do at Inkwell Studio, because it is really sort of an umbrella studio of a bunch of different things. We do straight science illustration. This is an ecological map of San Francisco that was fully illustrated, that just was released last year, the front and the back. Illustrations for magazines. I'm sure you're familiar with the Living Bird and how important illustrations are to that. Well, this is for a magazine called Bay Nature in California. Done my own version of dioramas and backdrops for institutions like the National Aquarium. Also practice fine art, and this is from a show that I curated in Oakland around sensory experience and botanicals. This is an artist residency at the DeYoung Museum in California. So, really, where there's just such a breadth of ways to visualize and communicate nature and science. We even do decorative art. So these are just some pieces from a private home that I just completed, and really this one is kind of my favorite. This is actually a microscopic view of lichen in a bathroom. It's an appropriate place for it. But public art really has been the great passions for Inkwell, and the mural series that Fitz refers to in his forward is for a project called the Migrating Mural, which is an ongoing Inkwell series. And the Migrating Mural is a series of art installations painted along migration corridors of wildlife that they share with people. So our very first series was highlighting the Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep in California along Highway 395. And it covered about a 120-mile stretch from Lee Vining to Lone Pine. So these are just a couple of close-ups from that series. And here's a map that just showcases the locations of the works. And one of the things about what we do, we truly believe in being able to use art as a vehicle, not just to visually excite, but also to help tell narratives and stories and conservation stories. So we partnered with the Department Fish and Wildlife, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Sierra Bighorn Sheep Recovery Program, as well as the Sierra Nevada Bighorn Sheep Foundation. That's a mouthful. And so we created 6 unique pieces highlighting different aspects of the herd's biology. And our focus currently is around the monarch butterfly. So you can see that the migration, there's 2 populations, the western and the eastern, but almost the entire lower 48 is connected by this one special insect. So it was a really wonderful sort of second iteration of our project to really connect the entire country. And we began the project in the fall of 2017, and we have 7 installations to date. So our first one, this piece is called Kaleidoscope. It's in Springdale, Arkansas. It's on an airport control tower. Perfect location for our first mural. This is in Winter Park, Florida at Full Sail University. And this was a really beautiful partnership between 2 other organizations, Full Sail University and the Nature Conservancy in Florida. So we were able to tell their story, and they created a brand new initiative called the Monarch Initiative, which is really, it was really fun to be a part of that. I'm also going to share a time-lapse video of process, because it's really fun to see everything sped up. Let's see, play. So our murals, unlike the one here in the lab, these outdoor projects usually take anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. We always have a team, as we did here with the lab, to create these works. And it's funny, it kind of becomes like a big paint by number. Really, when it comes down to it. So here we're putting up the stencils that we then trace the image and then fill it in with the colors. And it was really one of the weirdest winters in Florida. Normally February is a beautiful month to be outdoors, but it happened to be just this insanely humid and cold winter. And there were days when it was about 90-something% humidity, and the paint would just melt. Just completely melt off the wall. I mean, I was actually in tears. This mural never brought me to tears. That one actually did. I had to shed a couple of tears for that. So that's just a little snippet of that process. Let's see, we are here. Yeah? Okay. And one of the other things that we really try to do anyway is activism, and encouraging our partners to also do some on-the-ground conservation work. So Full Sail actually re-landscaped their facade and planted milkweed to provide butterfly habitat for that campus. And this is called Midnight Dream in downtown Orlando. And I'm just showing this for scale, as Kevin talked about scale, quite a different scale. We love working with students. Education is such a huge part of what we do as well. And this is with a group of 15 kids at SF Day, and they created this mural with me and my team. These are a series of banners that are now hanging, flanking the entrance of the Ogden Nature Center in Ogden, Utah. And these were just recently completed this past October. This is called Monarch and Moda. And it's a big parking lot structure to a building called the Monarch, which is actually an art studio and creative space and gallery and coffee shop, everything. And this is at Weber State University, and this is an interior mural. So murals, figurative art, naturalism, science illustration, these are all the categories that really embody Inkwell. And honestly, I could probably give an hour talk just about each one of these disciplines. They're so complex, but I just wanted to quickly talk about what they mean to us. You know, public art and painting on the walls and depicting the observed world around us is really just a human function. It's been for thousands and thousands of years, this tradition has been an expression, you know, fundamental to the human condition. And so I think about this a lot as when I think about art as a vehicle and a voice and a common language that we can all relate to. So that's quite important to me. Telling stories, you know, this is a Sistine Chapel, and I really believe that monuments and this particular platform has an important part to understanding the culture around us and our current ecosystems. And there aren't nearly enough monuments to nature. And so I really appreciate Todd McGrain's project, that passenger pigeon, that statue that you see as you walk in, the Lost Bird Project, so profound. Maya Lin's work. You know, we have so many other types of murals that touch on culture. So, you know, in Diego Rivera's words, my mural will picture the fusion between the great past of the Latin American lands as it is deeply rooted in the soil and the high mechanical developments of the United States. So I'm really proud to be able to have this mural stand for the evolution and diversity of birds and really monumentalize that for the world. And of course, naturalism and science illustration. I really appreciate sort of the historical trajectory that has gone through. You know, in the medieval era, bestiaries were very common, right? These encyclopedias of animals, and the depictions of them were actually so much more symbolic. And so I'm quite attracted to these depictions of animals that are meant to not capture the actual details and the observed details, but meant to capture a spirit. And I just wanted to sort of throw in a very early painting of mine from, gosh, this is probably from 2007, where, you know, it had been before I was very attracted to the idea of conveying information. And these were just a bit more of my musings, but nonetheless, I really appreciate what science illustration has given the world. And so thinking about really the foundation of that was the Renaissance and the growth of knowledge in medicine, in human anatomy, in just understanding the world around us, the printing era, you know, the dissemination of information. It was just so profound. And so this is a picture of a duck by Leonardo da Vinci, and of course Albrecht Dürer on the right, just masters. And of course, the role that scientific illustration has played for the world. These are some of the earliest depictions of Antarctica on the 1902 Discovery Expedition. So these are by Edward Adrian Wilson. And, you know, this was before photography, so can you imagine, you know, coming back and saying, there are these weird birds that are about this high and they don't walk very well, you know, how do you really describe that? So I really value, you know, really philosophically what science illustration has given us. So that leads us to this project and where Inkwell is today. And so one of the things that I think the book does is that it allowed me to take a moment and reflect on the project. And you know, one of the questions that I get asked often if I'm talking about my work or presenting my work is, oh, well, do you ever do humans? And my answer actually, honestly, is, well, yes, I'm doing humans all the time, but metaphorically through the natural world. And so there are so many stories that we can learn about ourselves by observing nature. And so this book was an opportunity to share some of those stories that I learned myself from the wall. So I'm just going to read a little excerpt from my intro. So Thayer Walker is, as I mentioned, is my husband and business partner, but he's also a writer and a journalist, and he and I worked on this book together. So the words that that are in this book are written by him, who is a much better writer. So I'm actually eternally grateful that tonight I have these beautiful words to read to you. So I'm going to go ahead and... So creating this book has been cathartic. It is the first time that I felt the freedom to reflect on the project as more than just an unbelievable amount of hard work. In doing so, it occurred to me that birds were the perfect subjects, both aesthetically and metaphorically, for a mural exploring diversity and evolution. These days in America, at least those topics, diversity and science, have become alarmingly divisive. Birds provide a comfortable entry point. Who doesn't love birds? They come in a rainbow of colors and a variety of sizes. They have distinct personalities and display behavior we can recognize as our own. They are our neighbors and often our closest connection to the wild. Many readers holding this book could walk out their front doors or look out their windows even and have an experience with the bird. We created this book with the intent to do more than simply highlight beautiful photographs of art on a wall. We hope that in addition to providing a window into my personal journey, it will showcase a broader cultural and geographic transcendence of birds and their ability to teach us about the human condition, from romance and the creative process to equal rights and immigration. And in devoting the last several years of my life to birds, I learned as much about myself as I did about them. And for this, I am eternally grateful. So we have copies of that here. That was a little weird and out of order, wasn't it? So here's the wall as I remember it in August of 2014. And I'm going to read you a passage called "The Blank Canvas." "The canvas," wrote Vincent van Gogh, "has an idiotic stare and mesmerizes some painters so much that they turn into idiots themselves. Many painters are afraid in front of the blank canvas, but the blank canvas is afraid of the real, passionate painter who dares and who has broken the spell of 'you can't' once and for all. We artists have a famously conflicted relationship with the blank canvas. Cézanne once lamented it as so fine and so terrible. And the playwright Stephen Sodom described the dilemma it presents as a need to bring order to the whole. The blank canvas is a world of possibility and an inner ring of hell. The aesthetics of negative space represent limitless potential. It can be the beginning and the end, quiet and loud, everything and nothing at all. And the terrifying part, the feeling that I'll never shake, is that my work won't make the blank canvas more beautiful or compelling than it already is. As I imagine them, my paintings are a triumph. The challenges and insecurities result from trying to make the finished work match the concept. And the scale and setting of the wall of birds only amplified those feelings. So it was quite terrifying. I don't know if many of you recall what the wall, at least the hallway and the stairwell looked like before 2014, but works of all the great masters were hanging on this wall. And I remember when I first designed my very first concepts, I left space for them because I just couldn't even imagine that they would take those down. And I remember having a conversation with Fitz, saying, I'm feeling like there's just not really enough room to showcase all of these families of birds. There's a lot of real estate to cover. And he's like, well, why don't we just take those paintings down? And I sort of froze. I'm like, really? Like that's what's going to happen? And that pressure to sort of fill that wall with or work that could even match up to that was quite terrifying. But I did, the most reasonable thing, which is, well, let's just fill it with something. No, that really wasn't it. But the world map was the sort of the connective tissue of the mural. We went through many iterations of how to depict the bird families, and I always came back to this because, the first thing that people do when they look at a map is to try to identify where they are or where they have been, or where they hope to go. And so in that way, putting the birds of the worlds on there really amplified that feeling of connection. So it was just made the most sense to me. The map is not super accurate, so I hope that you will forgive me on that. But a lot of the continents had to sort of be shifted around in order to make it correct. And so this is just a few months in, and it still looked so sparse. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to pull this off, right? Like these are the conversations I was sort of having daily with myself. So one of the things that I learned very quickly was you got to create almost an assembly line, a sort of systematic way of working. And so actually before I even came to the lab, the concept was it was completely created. It didn't deviate very far from this original design. The other thing that we did was create these very specific final drawings, and I'm so grateful to Jessie Berry for being my scientific advisor, and along with many other staff here at the lab, including Kevin, who looked at my renderings to make sure that I was accurately portraying all of the animals. And then, all of that work had to be figured out beforehand, so that when it was time to paint them on the wall, it was just production. I didn't have to make choices about the anatomy or how I was going to position them. The other thing that ended up happening was creating this beautiful avian Pantone chart. So 17 months is a really long time to try to make a consistent work of art. So having a palette that I could rely on, that continuity of colors and highlights and shadows and all of these things were all done with this palette. And so the birds were first blocked in with the palette's represented by the circles, and then details were then painted with acrylic paint. And then we discovered a really interesting moment. Like I said, there were as many discoveries in writing this book as in painting the mural itself. And so this moment right here actually was one that Kevin pointed out to Thayer and I. It actually speaks to all of the different ways that birds get their color. So I'm going to read that to you. Africa's Lake Victoria grouping represents many of the color types that characterize birds. Melanin, the same pigment that gives humans our own coloring, produces blacks, grays, and earth tones like rust and gold and feathers. The burnt sienna of the African paradise flycatcher's tail and the black on its head is a result of melanin. In addition to adding coloration, melanin also strengthens feathers, which is why white birds like the wandering albatross have black wings and wingtips, the places where air currents cause the greatest wear and tear. The iridescence on the neck and back of the superb starling comes not from pigment, but from structural color. The starling's outer feathers are constructed in a way that refracts light like myriad prisms, making the bird appear to shimmer. The eponymous coloring of the lilac-breasted roller results from a different kind of structural color, created when woven microstructures in the feathers called barbs and barbules reflect only the shorter wavelengths of light, like blue and violet. The primary colors that lend their name to the red and yellow barbet are derived from a class of pigments called carotenoids that the bird absorbs in its diet. These are the same compounds that turn flamingos' feathers pink. As a member of the family Musophagidae, did I say that correctly? Yes. The heartlob's turako displays pigmentation unique in the bird world. Birds have no green pigmentation in most cases, and verdant plumage is a combination of yellow carotenoids and the blue structural color. Turacos are an exception, displaying a green copper-based pigment called turacoverdin that they absorb in their herbivorous diet. The flash of red on the heartlob's underwings comes from tyrosine, another copper-based pigment unique to that family. So in this one moment, it happened to actually be a beautiful lesson about bird color. And coloring structural color with pigment is quite a challenge. And I am going to share a little story about this green broadbill. The green broadbill, I guess I'll move up a little bit. In Southeast Asia, the beech thickney and the green broadbill make for a dynamic, if unusual, pairing. Exquisitely patterned yet dull in color, the wide-ranging thickney is one of the largest shorebirds. I planted it on Sumatra, a grand exclamation point atop Indonesia's largest island. The thickney takes a commanding posture, casting a long gaze across the Malay Peninsula, where it adds compositional depth. The green broadbill is a different character entirely, a small, retiring rainforest passerine. Given its size, it really should have only taken a few hours to paint. But I spent nearly that long mixing a dozen different shades of green in an ultimately fruitless effort to capture its iridescent emerald coloring. And ultimately, I had to go buy a tube of fluorescent paint, which still couldn't quite match the bird's hue. So as usual, nature wins. And I remember that moment of, man, I cannot capture this green. It's driving me nuts. So after writing this passage with their, I started reflecting on another idea for a painting. I was invited to be an artist in residence at the Woodson Art Museum, the Liaki Woodson Art Museum. I'm not sure if many of you know about the annual Birds and Art exhibit, but they have a 40-year annual exhibit just highlighting people who depict birds in their artwork. And so I decided to create a story about blue pigment. I don't know if any of you noticed in that passage, but blue is not a pigment that exists in birds. And so that dilemma of how do I accurately depict a blue colored bird? It's really hard. So I created this painting called RG Bird. And this is the piece, and I highlight the indigo bunting. So that picture that I just showed a couple of slides back is just that difference of, when the light is hitting it just right versus when it's in shadow. It's totally different perception. And so that was an interesting concept for me to play around with was perception. And so the indigo buntings are flying through a color wheel, and of course, red, green, blue is the color model that our eyes see and observe color through light. And pigment is its complete opposite medium. When you mix all colors of light together, you get white. You mix all pigments together, you get black. So it really was this push and pull. So the shadows that these birds are casting are not meant to be literal shadows, but representative of different levels of light, and how the same four birds in different levels of light might appear completely different. Okay, so that's a segue into the concept of balancing science, illustration, and visual art, because they really are very different disciplines. And so this chapter sort of addresses that concept. Painting the Wall of Birds required balancing two very different disciplines, scientific illustration and fine art. Scientific illustration is data-driven and designed to inform, educate, and simplify complex processes. And when I'm creating scientific illustrations, I focus on how I want the audience to perceive and interpret the work. I'm hoping to elicit a specific reaction and understanding. So in that sense, The Wall of Birds was one giant scientific illustration. Our goal was to tell a story celebrating the diversity and evolution of birds by showcasing the animals at life size, within their range, and natural positions and plumage. The artistic parameters were rigid and the message was targeted. Fine art, on the other hand, is an internal process. Consideration of the audience is secondary to bringing my artistic vision to life. Rarely do I create a work of fine art with the desire to drive the viewer to a singular conclusion. On the contrary, the best fine art presents a host of philosophical paths for the curious mind to wander. And scientific illustration delivers a lesson. Fine art inspires reflection. So to create a successful mural, I had to find an equilibrium. Fidelity to accuracy was essential, but if that became the sole focus, the mural would run the risk of becoming too dry, too academic, and fundamentally ineffective. But neither was this the place to channel Frida Kahlo. So there was a number of ways that I had an opportunity to interpret and to make decisions that weren't necessarily based on whether or not the audience was going to see those decisions or not. I don't know if any of you have noticed that all the birds are facing one direction, and then all of a sudden they flip. But it's actually the old world and a new world facing each other. And then at a certain point, right at the edge of the map, they flip back around. And so they're kind of creating this sort of circular thing. And I love the idea that the kagu is looking across over at its closest relative, the sunbittern, which is on the opposite side of the world. So, there are just these small moments like that if you look at it long enough, you can start to come up with your own questions and your own allegories and your own metaphors. And I'll be sharing some of the ones that came to us when we wrote this book. But I'm also going to share just a couple of paintings where, I think that my sweet spot is when, just like R.G. Bird, it's inspired by information or by biology, but there's a different metaphor to that. In case of R.G. Bird, it's perception. This piece is called The Innovators. This was when I was at the De Young, and I wanted to highlight native, non-native relationships, both in the cultural sense in San Francisco, as we've been dealing with some interesting economic shifts and displacement and housing, but also the De Young is set in Golden Gate Park, which of course ecologically has no business being there. It was never meant to be a park as it is today. But we have a pair of nesting ravens in a non-native eucalyptus tree, and woven into the nest are iPhone lightning cables. And really it's kind of about, just inviting that question of adaptation and resilience, where and change. We all have to learn how to do that. This piece is called Prime Real Estate, and it is the story of the squirrels that were literally delivered to Golden Gate Park so that the residents had squirrels to feed. So these are eastern gray tree squirrels, of course non-native, in a prime real estate box, and they are sitting on top of an old 1890s real estate map of San Francisco, and the ground squirrel sort of ominously looking at this box of squirrels about to be released on its habitat. These are just a couple of brand new paintings that I just finished. This piece is called Rise Home, and it's a play on the word rhizome. And it's an underground stem that's connecting a community of plants, and of course it's about interconnectedness and the importance of that working together. This piece is called Cornerstones, for two reasons. Recognizing that, without plants, without all these beautiful photosynthetic organisms, we don't have a foundation to even have amazing animals and people. And of course, birds, one of the things that I loved hearing so much here at the lab was that birds are an indicator species. And so kind of combining these cornerstones was a beautiful marriage. And so this painting you can sort of hang at any corner. This is called Daughter, and the little sort of offshoot that you see growing off of the wood strawberry, that's called a daughter plant. The main plant is a mother, and it sort of puts out these runners or stolons, and they make clones of each other. But it also, that shape, just the silhouette of that plant looks so fallopian to me. So kind of creating this mirror image of that is meant to evoke thoughts of the female reproductive system. Okay, so then are the stories that kind of came into mind about what kind of lessons we can learn from birds. I'd like to share this excerpt called, parts of it. It's kind of a long one, but I'm going to read just a few passages from it. It's called Lady's Choice. And one of the things when I was painting the mural, obviously I was painting a lot of male birds. They are the showier versions. They're the ones that we recognize first and foremost. They are the displayers when mating. But it kind of got a little bit irritating. And so there were some moments where I had the ability to paint the female birds. So I thought I had this bookmark. Okay. The lack of female representation in the mural led me to reflect on female representation in ornithological art. To what should be the surprise of no one, women have historically been underrepresented in the field. Some of the earliest Western studies of nature come from ancient Greece and Rome, patriarchies in which Aristotle and Pliny the Elder, respectively, produced writings and descriptions of the natural world that influenced scientists for centuries, but where women had few rights or opportunities. A roll call of the most influential bird artists from the age of exploration to the modern era: John James Audubon, Louis Agassiz Fuertes, Edward Lear, Francis Lee Jacques, Roger Torrey Peterson, Charlie Harper, David Sibley, to name but a few, is similarly devoid of women. Since the federal duck stamp art contest, the only juried art contest sponsored by the U.S. government, and one which I have had the privilege and honor to judge, held its first public competition in 1949, just 3 women have won. And I have to just kind of add a caveat to that. The way that they judge is really quite fair. So, that's not necessarily a remark on that. But when women have advanced, their work has often been overlooked. The 19th century British artist, naturalist, and entrepreneur John Gould is considered the father of Australian ornithology for his pioneering lithographs of the continent's birds and wildlife. Yet Gould was not a strong painter. His talents, rather, lay in making quick field sketches that captured the character of his subject. Overseeing as creative director a team of artists to produce his work and in salesmanship, he was a visionary and a scientist, but no artistic genius. By comparison, Gould's wife, Elizabeth, was enormously talented, versed in drawing, watercolors, and lithography. In addition to giving birth to their 8 children, she died following complications of her last labor. She produced some 600 illustrations for John's books during their 12 years of marriage. Her initials, alongside her husband's, appear on the plates she produced, but it is John who won the applause of history. So she actually was the one who painted his lithographs. Audubon's skill is indisputable, but the world may never have known his work were it not for the professional discipline and personal sacrifice of his wife, Lucy, as both the family's primary caregiver and breadwinner. Lucy raised her 2 sons while her husband, financed by her school teacher salary, chased birds across the wilds of America for months and years at a time. And in publishing Birds of America, Lucy acted as an editor, saleswoman, and production manager. She even played an influential role in the environmental legacy attached to the Audubon name today. As a young student, George Bird Grinnell, the founder of Audubon Society of New York, the precursor to today's National Society, grew familiar with the great artist's work while studying in the home of his tutor, Lucy Audubon. So, I think that, 50 years ago, as the daughter of Korean immigrants, I probably wouldn't have had this opportunity to create this work. But there, and obviously more and more women are coming into the field, and so many of our Bartels illustrators are often women. So it's all moving in a wonderful direction, but there's still so much work to be done. So I hope that the Wall of Birds will stand as an example of the power of female self-determination and the beauty it can add to the world. And we kind of came across this story because we actually started thinking about sexual selection and really starting to think about, well, why is it that all these wonderful male birds have these showy, beautiful characteristics and the songs? And it's really because the females were choosing those genes to then get passed down. So it's this really remarkable allegory that you can see in sexual selection, and just the value of what each sex brings to the world. I'm going to share another passage called Painting a Song. Oops. Sorry about that. Bear with me. Technical blip. Here we go again, déjà vu. Here we go. Painting a song. Birds are the Broadway stars of the animal kingdom. They flaunt beautiful costumes, perform showy dance routines, and serenade each other in a complexity scientists are only beginning to understand. They sing to announce themselves, warn off threats and rivals, and woo paramours. Their language fills the air with music. Birds don't just communicate, they perform. The Neotropics, with all their diversity, provided a grand stage on which to explore the behaviors of avian song and dance. The first challenge I faced in doing so was a conceptual one. How do you make the audible visible? How do you paint bird song? Simply composing a bird with an open beak doesn't do the trick. And for the black cat Donacobius, singing is a full-bodied affair. It bobs up and down in song while wagging its fan tail feathers, pairing its vocal performance with a physical one. Mated pairs duet either to each other or in response to other performing couples. Usually they'll position themselves one above the other, so I perched this Donacobius at an angle above an imagined mate. They sing asynchronously in a piercing medley of whirs and whistles. And that actually was inspired by sort of these late nights that I did keep at the lab. And I kept late hours at the lab painting these neotropical birds, and the noises of nature filled my nights. The visitor center stands in Sapsucker Woods Sanctuary, 220 acres of mixed deciduous forests and wetlands. Sapsucker shelters a classic swath of northeastern wildlife, beavers, birds, coyotes, even the occasional fisher, and outdoor microphones pipe ambient sound into the observatory. I'd paint in the lift for hours and hours, oblivious to the passing time, while the caterwauling calls of a barred owl, like a giant squeegee being dragged across a window, echoed through the lobby and interrupted my reverie. And during those too frequent all-nighters, the rolling trill of red-winged blackbirds announcing the dawn informed me it was time to retire. The chorus often brought to mind the words of Claude Monet. I would like to paint the way a bird sings. On my walk to the car through the sharp morning air, I couldn't help wishing I could sing like them too. Actually, another one of my favorite late night moments was in July when the fireflies were out. I felt like I was drunk or something, like it was walking through that and just all the blinking lights. It was amazing. So yeah, night was a really special time to work at the lab. This is another one of my favorite allegorical excerpts. In the chapters are organized by geographic regions, and so when thinking about North America, well, what makes North American birds unique? And talking to Fitz, he said, well, they're known for their long distance migration. And so, wow, that was such a beautiful way to tell this particular story. So this chapter is called The American Dream. They flock to America year after year, the tired, the poor, and the huddled masses yearning to breathe free. They come by the hundreds, thousands, millions, billions, like countless weary travelers before them, drawn by the promise of a productive life. Filled with an appetite for hard work, they hope that their offspring will thrive in a land of opportunity. They cross the great seaways of the Pacific and Atlantic, past the glowing torch of Lady Liberty, whose bronze-cast sonnet, the new Colossus, welcomes the homeless tempest-tossed. They brave violent Caribbean storms and harsh deserts of Mexico, many of them dying of exhaustion or by the will of those who would wish them harm. They are our country's original immigrants, the birds of North America. We celebrate some of the continent's most iconic birds as American, but many of them spend only a few months per year within our country's borders. Some 350 of the 650 species that breed here are long-distance migrators. They flee the fierce competition of their wintering grounds in Central and South America for the northern spring and its bounty of food and nesting grounds. They understood America as a drive-through long before it became a fast food nation. So I threw in that map. I just love, we chose the American pelican, the white American pelican, as the bird to be paired with this excerpt. But yeah, man, it is truly an American bird. So I'm just going to end tonight's talk before we take questions with this last chapter. And I have to thank the lab once again, too, for regaling some more specific stories with me in order to sort of round out this whole thing. So farewell to an old friend. The ornithological artists of yore faced a daunting task long before their brushes ever hit the canvas. In order to accurately paint a bird, they had to observe it first. Sometimes they relied on stuffed specimens to inform their paintings, but the Audubons and Goulds of the world also spent years of their lives in the wilderness and often sailing across vast oceans to get there, so that they might accurately capture a bird's spirit and structure. In that context, I had a significantly easier charge. I'd seen comparatively few of the murals birds in the wild, but with an endless library of photos and videos and the guidance of the world's best ornithologists, I had plenty of great references. There were some birds, however, that I knew on a personal level, including one of the largest and last I painted, the great blue heron. In 2010, I was accepted to a science illustration internship at the lab, which was when I first met Fitz and learned of his vision for a mural. I'd arrive expecting to be shuffled into some cramped corner of a dark basement that no one ever visits, as is so often the fate of interns everywhere. So I was so surprised and thrilled when I was given a corner desk in the lab's large, beautifully lit second-floor staff lounge, which sadly does not exist any longer. The surprises I'd soon discover had just begun. The lounge overlooks Sapsucker Woods Pond, part of a small but thriving wetland network where dam-building beavers shape the landscape and abundance of fish and frogs attracts a menagerie of birds and other wildlife. The lounge's long external wall was lined with windows, which were in turn lined with spotting scopes and binoculars that the staff would use to watch the action outside. The spring of 2010 was a particularly active time, both in the lounge and on the pond. A pair of great blue herons took residence in a 50-foot-tall dead white oak tree smack in the middle of the pond. And their arrival the year prior marked the first time in recorded history that a pair of great blue herons had nested in Sapsucker Woods. It was all unfolding in plain view of the offices, and I had literally a front row seat to the action. The nest, 4 feet wide, 1 foot deep, was a work of art, a delicate sculpture of dead branches woven to shelter new life. All day, dozens of lab staffers would cycle in and out of the lounge, marveling as all 4 chicks eventually fledged. Life and death drama unfolded outside my window on a daily basis. During one particularly brutal thunderstorm, the male stood atop the nest, spreading its 6-foot wingspan to shield the female and the chicks from the elements. To the chagrin of the adults, a second breeding pair showed up, built a nest in another tree, and ultimately fledged a pair of chicks. There was hope around the lab that the pond might become a heronry, but the first pair made it very clear that visitors were unwelcome, constantly harassing the newcomers. I left the lab at the end of my 5-month internship, and the herons soon followed suit, but like me, they would return. The next year, the first mating pair came back and immediately dismantled the second pair's nest, taking the stakes to fortify their own nest. Eventually, the lab mounted a pair of cameras in the nest. This was an event that deserved to be shared with the world. The herons became an internet sensation. Millions of people watched the lives of these birds unfold with an intimacy never experienced before. One season, while incubating her eggs in the dark of night, the female was attacked by a great horned owl, which resulted in an egg cracking. Fortunately, it was not a fatal blow, and as with the other 4 eggs, the chick hatched and fledged. A few months before I returned to the lab in 2014 to start the mural, a fierce March storm blew the nest apart. While great blue herons still regularly visit the pond, they no longer nest there. They range across Central and North America, but when it came time for me to paint one on the wall, there was never a doubt that I'd place it over Sapsucker Woods. Painting this heron felt like revisiting an old friend. I composed it as if it were stalking the shallows of Sapsucker Pond, waiting for a fish. A gentle breeze has blown its head, feathers aflutter, a graceful compositional counterweight to its sharp and hefty beak. The bird's blue-gray body is the color of Ithaca's moody spring sky. Its sweeping shapes, that long S-curved neck, and the stringy chest and back feathers that help it shed the muck that comes with the life in the wetlands, made me feel as if my brush was sculpting the bird rather than painting it. During those months of my internship, I grew to know the great blue heron as patient, disciplined, and extremely fast when the situation demanded. Lessons that I drew to complete this mural. I painted the great blue heron as a celebration of their time nesting at the pond and as an invitation for them to soon return. So it is an honor and a privilege to share the Wall of Birds with you and the world, and more so this book, which really is meant to be read. So I hope that you all have enjoyed some of the excerpts that I shared with you tonight. Thank you so much again for coming. It really is truly a pleasure to be back here. So I'm more than happy to take questions.
Yeah, we have time for questions. Let me get some of the house lights up.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for that lecture. It was marvelous. And I'm really eager to ask you. A couple of years ago when the mural was first opened to us, I was upstairs looking at it. And this has never happened to me before. I was smitten by one of the birds.
Oh.
And I'd love to know if you or anyone else has any story about how you chose the shoebill in Africa.
So the question is, how do we choose the shoebill in Africa? And I believe the answer to that is that it's the only one in its family. So some of those, that was not a task that I had. I'm very grateful for that, actually. The lab had to come up with the final master list, and for a bird like that, it was very easy. But some of the other birds required a lot more discussion.
How did you get the model for it? The one that did you? I guess you used photographs, but did you?
Well, actually, the second part of that question was what were the references that I used for that. The lab actually has a taxidermy shoebill. So I had the great fortune of being able to actually see it stuffed and mounted, not just in a drawer. But of course, I do watch a lot of videos because there really is nothing like being able to see the birds in person and in the wild. And of course, I am not even close to being able to seeing these birds. But videos really do help me understand their behavior and kind of pausing and capturing stills, and then of course collecting photographs.
You did a wonderful job with that one.
Oh, thank you.
But that one in particular just kind of jumped out.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you, and want to applaud your commitment to public art, which enriches us all.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you. As someone whose artistic talent is kind of in Kevin's range of stick figures, and as someone who can barely write a few sentences without a whoop somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
When you're doing a mural like this, do you have any whoops moments? And if you do, what do you do next? How do you handle that?
So the question was, what happens when I make a mistake, which, and of course, inevitably I do. The cool thing about paint is you can cover it up. No, but really, it's the lift is shaky. You just sort of get used to that motion of rocking back and forth. But sometimes, honestly, painting just feels like you're just pushing paint around until you get it to where you like it. So I don't know how to better describe that. There were some birds that were really a struggle, ones that I thought were going to be much easier than they were, but ended up really kicking my butt. The ostrich was one of those birds. I had this insane spreadsheet. It was not beautiful or romantic whatsoever. It was just an Excel spreadsheet of birds that I put next to it a time slot of, okay, I'm going to give this bird 6 hours. I'm going to give this bird 5 days. I'm going to give this one 3 days. I had allotted 7 days for that ostrich, and it took 5 days for the ostrich, and it took 7. So that was actually really stressful, especially because it was one of the earliest birds that I had painted. But you just eventually find a place where you say, okay, I can move on. But I definitely have birds there that I didn't know. Are you all familiar with the interactive that was created by Bird Academy? So fabulous. I didn't know that was going to be made beforehand, and you can zoom in to every single one of those birds in way more detail than I ever expected. So there are definitely ones where, they were higher up, and I was like, oh, no one's really going to see this one. But that wasn't the case at all. But yeah, there are birds that I feel are better than others. Clearly, my cover bird, the great hornbill, was one of my favorites and still remains today as one of my favorites. Yes?
Jane, thank you, first of all. I'm just curious, you release your art to the world, it becomes bigger than even the experience of making it, because you share the experience with others, and you've had so many steps along the way since it was completed, and now you're back tonight. How does it feel to be back tonight and see it and see how it's affecting you?
So how does it feel to be back tonight after all this time of creating the work? It feels great. I can't tell you, it's just such a joyful moment for me to be back and to see the work on the wall. Once you paint it and you leave it and with public art, it's no longer yours. So how the public continues to perceive the work or the meaning that it will continue to have for that community you no longer own that. But I have so many proud moments and feelings knowing that this mural will continue to be used and enjoyed and experienced and as a learning tool, as just something to visually enjoy. I'm just going to point out Emma Renier. She was actually one of the assistants that helped with the mural. She's a student here at Cornell. And she was just letting me know that just last term, they had to study the bird families of the world. They would just come out and look at the wall and quiz each other and learn from that. And gosh, that's the kind of stuff that I hope to continue to hear. But mostly it's just, I'm almost outside of it. Like, wow, who painted that? Yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine. Yeah.
What was the last bird you painted, and how did it feel to be in the final one?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. What was the last bird that I painted, and what did that feel like? The last bird that I painted was the barn owl. The first bird that I painted was the New Zealand saddleback. But when I finished the barn owl, it should have felt like a celebratory moment, but that also marked the beginning of having to paint the evolution. So the evolution, I didn't even read any excerpts from that. Most of the excerpts are actually quite technical, but it felt like a completely separate mural. So that ended, and then I was like, okay, now I gotta go do this. And then I have another sort of funny story to share, that even when I finished the evolution, that's when we started rolling out sort of the publicity of the work, and it started to hit media. And I think it might have been in Audubon, a blog, an online news story in Audubon, and we got an email from a reader who had said, "Oh, I love this project, but I feel badly about saying this, but the great gray owl's tail is painted backwards." And it was one of the first birds that I had painted. This is an institution of ornithological study, and no one caught it. It was kind of funny and totally embarrassing. But I had to go back and fix that tail. So, I actually do this so often, and it really irritates me, but when I'm painting bird tail feathers in flight, looking at the ventral side, I often flip it like I'm looking at it on the top side. And the way that birds' feathers lay, it's very specific in how they overlap. So it was wrong. And I had to go back and repaint that. So yeah, there were a lot of funny moments. So that's kind of a mistake question there. Yeah. Yes?
Okay, my favorite bird is the magnificent frigate bird.
Oh, cool.
Can you talk a little bit about how it won that prestigious
Great, yes, the question is around the magnificent frigate bird and how I chose its posture and location on the wall. So actually, I'm going to kind of flip back because, that doesn't mean that there weren't some deviations. So I'm going to refer back to the original concept sketch. So I had initially envisioned the frigate bird in flight, but I really wanted to show off that red pouch. And when I did my very first preliminary sketch, I was informed that they wouldn't ever really display the pouch like that in flight. I thought, well, what am I going to do? It's an ocean bird, so I have to figure out some place for it. And then I just looked up where I was going to paint it and noticed that there was a sprinkler above the doorway. And I went, well, there's a perch. That's perfect. So that is how I landed on the location and the position of the bird. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
What was the hardest bird to paint and why?
Ooh, what was the hardest bird to paint and why? They were all hard on some level. I think the wandering albatross was one that I went through more iterations than any of the others. And I don't know if it's its proportions or what have you, but as you can see, most of the renderings that I did were on a small scale. They were about 9 by 12 inches. But the wandering albatross, when I created it small and then scanned it and blew it up, it just always looked wrong to me. And I tried it several times and it always just looked off. So I ended up having to just draw the wandering albatross at scale. So I drew it at that scale and then transferred that directly to the wall. So that definitely was one of the more challenging ones. Let's see, what other birds? Yeah, that ostrich, like I said, was quite difficult. The penguin was kind of a tricky one, the emperor penguin. I didn't want it to just kind of feel like a black silhouette, but I also didn't quite have the time to spend on rendering every single one of those tiny, tiny, tiny feathers. So I think the challenge, one of the things, there's actually an excerpt in the book that addresses this, is I had to find techniques that would yield the highest results in the fewest brush strokes. So how to capture a lot of detail or the suggestion of detail, but then also having to paint the birds in a lot of high contrast. I might not actually paint in the same way. I'm just going to go ahead and like this, for example, the way that I painted these ravens, when they're meant to be just looked here, it's just a different approach. A lot of the birds on the wall, you'll notice, have a very high contrast graphic quality. I was painting the cassowary, and it was late at night, and it gets quite dim, and I'm working really hard on that head, putting a lot of love and attention and detail, and I come down from the lift, and I go upstairs to that second floor landing, and I look and I'm like, I can't see a thing that I painted. So it was really telling that just the approach that I had to take for suggesting feathers or highlights, really had to come with a lot of contrast. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
How did you decide how many birds you would depict in a geographic area?
Oh, that's a great question. How did we lay the birds on the map? We did want to round out the whole map as best as we could. So, some of the birds, like the peregrine falcon that could be found worldwide, we sort of filled in those places in the Middle East where there might not have been as many sort of endemic families or so we chose, like, the great tit, for example, probably is more familiar as a European sort of bird, but we put it in China. I had to go back and repaint that one too, because we discovered later that the yellow sort of flanks on a great tit is more common for Europe and not for China. So we had to sort of white that out a little bit more to make it appropriate for that region. So there were a lot of these fun things. And funny enough, this mural is already out of date. I think that there are several new bird families that have been added to the list since this mural was finished. And actually, when we first started the mural, there were like 12 less families. So even in the time that I was painting the murals, the number of families grew. So
We just kept looking at that as a reason to bring you back.
that's what I was hoping someone would say at the
Yes, he has to come back and paint another.
Yeah, let's make that a every 10-year thing. Well, thank you again so much.
Thank you so much, Jane, and you are going to sign books?
Yes,
So
I would
book
love
signing
to.
afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you.